I'm going to talk about start to finish everything you need to know about game ideas. It's something that, as the main ideas guy of Bite Me Games, is something near and dear to my heart. And we've had some good ideas and we've had some really bad ideas. And we've had ideas die very often as well. So this course, I'm just gonna call it a course, even though it's not, it's just a video, is aimed at everyone. Whether you are a beginning indie developer and you just don't know what game you should make to begin with, or you're someone who, hey, has had a few games released at that point, but never really felt like the games actually got appreciated by the market the moment they hit release. Probably it was down to your game idea as well. So sit down and let's strap in. Now for this video, I am going to cheat a little bit. I'm gonna look at my notes because, like I said, I have followed a bit of a course structure. So let's talk about what you will have at the end of this video. The goal would be that you can come up and validate, and that's an important thing. Coming up with ideas is easy. Validating them, that's the harder part. A good game idea. Maybe it's not going to be $1 million game idea, but it is going to be a game idea that probably is going to fit your skill set. It's going to be something that has some marketability or sellability. So it's not just a dead genre that you're going to be making. And it's just a game that you want to make as well, because that's something, you know, there's that Venn diagram of the three circles, the game you want to make, the game you can make, and the game that's profitable to make. And then you need to find that little, well, it's not a circle, but that little overlap in the middle for your game. And that's what the goal is for this video. So let's go into module 1, why ideas fail. Because I have no scientific provenance for this, but I would say that 80–90% of all ideas that you come up with never get made. I have this as well. For every game that releases on Steam, I have another 8, 9, even more game ideas that will never make it. I've made videos about it on the Patreon channel here before, so of like, hey, these are some game ideas that could be good, but do not fit, for example, in that Venn diagram. And there's 3 main reasons I would say why game ideas can fail. And I think the first one, and this is one that I notice a lot with our audience, and it's actually something that we had literally 2 days ago from when I recorded this as well, which is too vague. So this could be when you have a game idea and it just is like, hey, I'm going to make a Souls-like MMO, which, okay, cool, but what is the actual idea? I don't know. It's a Souls-like MMO. It's basically such a broad spectrum that you don't really know what makes this game unique, what makes this game interesting. And a great example for this is one of the games that we're working on right now, Evermarch. It's a temporary name because probably going to rename it, but Evermarch was a game that Thomas initially came up with, where he was like, okay, I want a mechanically deep game, and I want to make it kind of RTS-like city builder with teleportation as its core, where like you teleport your entire base basically between different biomes. And okay, started working on it, and he ended up just making a generic RTS. And I realized that this was a problem of too vague as well when I couldn't explain the game to anyone. When I went to Gamescom and people asked me like, hey, what are you working on? It's very easy for me to talk about Maid Cafe Simulator and Hard Carry because those are very tangible, concrete ideas. But when I was trying to explain Evermarch, I always fell into this trap of like, yeah, it's kind of like a city builder and like some RTS, but I never had a good concrete idea of, hey, how do we make this less vague? I'm gonna dive into what we did in the case of Evermarch in a second, but this is one of those things. When you can't clearly explain to someone else what the game is about, then you have a too vague idea. Or when it's, you know, you're just saying, I'm going to be making a 3D platformer. Okay, cool. A lot of stuff, options are possible there. Another way that games can fail is because they're too big or too complex. This is something that, once again, we've run into as well, where maybe, okay, you can be like, hey, I'm going to make Skyrim in space. And you can even refine all of these ideas, where maybe you end up with a game design document that's similarly sized to Star Citizen. Okay, you have a good idea, you have an idea that there's clearly potential for, but you're a solo indie developer who's doing this as a hobby. This idea, whilst noble, it's not feasible. You're not going to hit it, whether it is from just a pure time perspective or it is because you're going to be doing things that you generally don't understand. If you're making a multiplayer MMO game and you've never worked with multiplayer code before, well, probably this would be a game idea to kind of sit out and maybe build up towards that. This is once again a problem that we've kind of run into multiple times, because the problem is if you don't know how to actually make the final game, your game's gonna suck. And this is, once again, bringing back a recent example. We had the idea of making medieval Call of Duty zombies. I forgot the name already. Age of ROD. That was the game name we had for it. But the problem was that whilst we knew exactly what game we wanted to go for, and we could literally look at Call of Duty and like all of their zombies game modes and kind of just lift all of their mechanics and put in our game, we didn't have the skills in terms of animating and multiplayer controller and all of that basically to make this game come to life. And we were taking so many hits basically in regards of, can we actually make this game, that we ended up having to decide this is a game that's too hard for us. We're going to scrap the idea. We'll go at scrapping ideas later as well, don't worry. Right now we're just talking about the 3 ways that your game can fail. And then we come to the last way that a game idea can kind of fail at inception, and that is when it's way too niche. Basically, this is when you get those very artsy games, but I'm saying artsy in kind of a derogatory way here, not like a Return to the Opera Dinn game, where, okay, you know what you want to make, and you can in fact make it, but it just is like so hyper specific that you're taking niches of niches that nobody's interested in it. For example, it's a horror racing game, or it is a horse racing game set in space and all of that, where you're mixing genres and audiences and all of that, that the intersect of those two grooves basically is like 5 people. And if you're doing this purely as an art project, sure, but chances are you're not doing that, or at least you would hope to get your game out on Steam and to get your game into the hands of as many people as possible and give them good experiences. So if you have a game idea that's, you were thinking about for a long time but never really ended up doing, what's the reason? Why are you not making it right now? And I think my guess for the most part with our audience is going to be that it's too vague, which we can kind of solve, but it is unfortunately a big problem. And that brings me to the second chapter of this module, where an original game does not mean that you have a marketable game. I think this is a very big one, or even like, I think a lot of people on the Bite Me audience do kind of understand this, but especially when I go outside of the Bite Me game development sphere, basically, a lot of game developers, they have a unique game idea. Let's say it's their horse racing game in space, and they immediately think this game is unique, hence people are going to be interested in it because there's nothing like it on the market. Once again, big red flags when you say this to me, if you take like our coaching calls or whatever, because it actually means that nobody has ever validated this on the market. And you're suddenly going from like, I'm just pulling out numbers, a 20% success rate to a 0.5% success rate. Because if you're taking a survivor-like and then doing the yoink and twist, which is what I enjoy, and making your own unique spin on the survivor-like, you at least know that, hey, there's an audience who likes Survivor likes, and they'll probably like this addition that I made, this improvement that I've made, versus, I don't know if there's an audience for it, I just thought it was a cool game idea, and I couldn't find anything similar when I asked ChatGPT if a game like this existed. I think it's a very short-sighted approach to game development if you only look at, I have to be as original as possible. A lot of very successful games, to be honest, were not made by being 100% original. They were made by, like I said, my favorite thing, the yoink and twist, where you take an existing game and then you add your own thing, you improve upon the experience, or you slightly change something else, but the core DNA of the game remains the same. This is where you need to ask yourself that question of, would someone on Steam actually understand this game and want to buy this game? Because originality goes back as well to that too vague thing, where if you cannot clearly explain your game because you have no reference points, then you get some trouble. For example, something you see a lot with Steam short descriptions. I think Steam short descriptions are my favorite thing to validate a game idea very quickly is, can you write a Steam short description for your game idea? There's no game yet, but what would you put down on that Steam page if you had to make one right now, right before you have a game? Once again, for Evermarch, we didn't really have that because it was just very boring. But especially in terms of that originality versus marketability thing, you need to be able to draw upon something. If you're making a game with some tower defense or city building in it, you're probably going to be able to mention that in the short description of, what are we going to be doing? Build towers, expand your city, and all of that, because those are terms that people are familiar with. It's also why, for example, you put a lot of verbs in it, because you're making the game more understandable. You're taking this complex concept and explaining to the player then what are they actually going to be doing in the game. And they need to have that frame of reference, and if you're going for something 100% original, they will completely miss out on that frame of reference and not understand what you're actually trying to sell them. So the easy thing now I have for you, because we're following the course structure, the test for you now is to take one of your game ideas. the one that you may have been musing about, or maybe even the game idea that you're working on right now that you've never actually really tried to validate and all of that, and just write me a 300 character Steam short page description for it. And you can put it down below in the comments as well, and I'll give you some feedback on what I think about the exact game idea. I promise that one. Because here you often notice that, hey, actually, I don't really have much to say. I don't have anything interesting to say. I'm going to get something hyper generic, or I have something that's very vague where maybe it's not generic, it's just I don't know how to describe it, which is honestly an even bigger problem than being just a generic city builder, for example. Because I have a little section now as well in the second module where we take a look at some other games and reverse engineer what made them work. Now, of course, there are a lot of other factors that made them work. Maybe the Steam algorithm blessed them. Maybe, you know, they just got lucky, whatever you want to say. There are still going to be some things that we can see if we break down games into their individual components, they all share. So, for example, Vampire Survivors is, at the end of the day, a stupidly simple game. That's why so many people cloned it as well. Survivor-likes became a thing as well, where we just had auto-attacking and movement. And that's the core of the game. That's the core DNA that you see with every Survivor-like game. Can you break your own game down, for example, to get to that core DNA of what is this game about? And then they figured out, okay, we have this simple mechanic, which are the movement. What's going to be more of the general market? Because you could turn this into either a puzzle game, or you could make this into the Survivor-like game, where you add some roguelite elements and meta progression, or you could turn it into more of a linear combat-based game. There's a lot of different ways, different markets you could tap still with that core mechanic. That core idea still can go a bunch of different ways, where you're basically now, from that core idea that you have of your mechanic, choosing the Steam tags. This is maybe a weird idea, but you're basically determining what's the direction we're going to go with this. And then by simply focusing on that pure dopamine crack addiction, basically, because the guy was a casino game developer at the end of the day before he became a real game developer, a Steam game developer, that was kind of the core for this game. Highly replayable, highly engaging, with some relatively deep systems still and a lot of content, but I think what a lot of people do sometimes forget with these games like Vampire Survivors and whatever is that Vampire Survivors today versus Vampire Survivors on release day is still a very different game, where of course once you had that initial breakout hit, it's very easy to just keep pumping in expansions because you can keep working on the game, you can keep getting people on board of the team. I actually met the Vampire Survivors team back at DevCon, and there are like 32 people at this point, where, you know, you started with one person, go to 32, it's very easy to then turn on the floodgates, basically, of more content, more mechanics and all of that. Let's forget about that. Let's think about the original idea instead. An alternative, which I also met at Gamescom at the Unity party, and this is not just to flex, but to kind of show you that, hey, I have talked to these developers and been able to ask them these questions, are the developers of Phasmophobia, where, once again, started as a very, very small team, 3 people working on that game, and I think right now, just on the event alone, there were like 16, and then they had left a bunch of other people back in the UK. There's a lot of difference between the original version and then the version that's out now, because I think they released out of early access a few months ago. At the end of the day, core mechanic, core DNA for this game, super simple. First-person controller, and then, you know, you have some simple tools like your flashlight and whatever to go and hunt the ghosts. And once again, you can choose. We have this core DNA. What is the tag we're going to go for? What is the direction we're going to turn into this game? Once again, are we going to make this more of a survival horror game? Are we going to turn this more into a puzzle game? Or are we going to add the multiplayer tag and make this a co-op experience? There's a lot of ways to go for this. And once again, they chose to go for that multiplayer tag. But, you know, you need to keep in mind, for every correct tag that someone chooses, there's also people choosing different tags that maybe do not get that same amount of success. We'll talk about tagging in a second as well. But then they started, once again, very small. One single map. And then, of course, it's easier to expand once you have that ball rolling. You have those first purchases, especially if you're in an early access mode. And keep expanding upon that content. But they focused on highly viral, Twitch-friendly, almost streamer bait appeal for that game. Whilst at the end of the day, if you break it down to the basics, the game is very simple. And my question to you is, what would be the core DNA of your game idea right now? Would it be that simple character controller? Or is it more of, you know, a card system, a battle system for your roguelike deck build, for example? You can do something with card combat. Is it something else? Ask yourself, what is this the core thing of my game idea, if I broke it down to that core small thing, like for example the movement or the single mechanic, like a fishing mini game for all I care, and then what are the potential ways, the alternate realities I can go for, basically depending on the Steam tag that I would mix into it. It's kind of like that alchemy game. I don't know if you played this like a long time ago. I know this was a mobile game. It kind of still exists, where you just take like two elements and you combine it and you just keep combining until you make everything in the world, basically. You can do that thing as well, where you take the DNA of your game and you find the tag and you're like, okay, how would it look if I added roguelite to this core loop? How would it look if I added automation to this core loop? Probably it would be a very different game. Kind of get a feel for what is something that I kind of do vibe with at this point. And that brings us to the next part, where we're kind of stepping back now of, okay, what are you going to be doing in the game? And taking more of a, what are you going to be feeling in the game approach? Because at the end of the day, games are an emotional experience. Maybe they make you very happy. Maybe they make you very sad if you play like some of the more story-focused games. Maybe it's just cozy if you like a Stardew Valley and whatever. At the end of the day, nobody is buying Stardew Valley for the fishing mechanic or the farming mechanic. They're buying it for the feeling that Stardew Valley gives them, the happiness that they get from it. And there are 4 core feelings basically that you can get when playing games. Either you have the feeling of power, where you are in that power fantasy, you're beating up hundreds of enemies and slaying hordes of zombies or whatever. Or it's something, like I said, more cozy, where you're feeling like it's a bit of an escape from the world, basically. It's once again a feeling. If we go to horror games, for example, the core feeling here is tension. It's being scared. It's not knowing what's coming next. It's making, once again, the player strongly feel something. And lastly, it's a sense of wonder. It's a sense of exploration. I wouldn't call Minecraft a cozy game. I wouldn't call it a horror game. It definitely has some of those elements, but here it's very much that wow experience, that unlocking the parts of the map on GTA where you start the game with the entire black map, and then as you go and progress more and more, you're slowly starting to discover more and more of the entire environment. At the end of the day, those are the 4 main emotions, and you shouldn't mix and match. That's another big thing. Don't feel like, oh, I'm just going to make a cozy, powerful horror game or whatever, because that doesn't exist. I think my favorite analogy always, and this is one that Chris Zukowski once told me, is I like ice cream and I like steak as well, for example. Maybe I like both power games and cozy. They're both my favorite kinds of food, but that doesn't mean that if I take myself a big old blender and I throw in a few scoops of ice cream and I throw in my steak and I just mix them together, I'm going to be absolutely disgusted by the result, and I'm not even going to want to look at it because you've just ruined 2 perfectly good things. So this is the question you need to ask yourself here. What is going to be the feeling that you have here for your game? All of your games honestly can be kind of described with a feeling. Let's bring it up to our games. My Virtual Friend, very clearly cozy game. Overtime Anomaly and Kyoto Anomaly, very clearly tension games, horror games. I would say as well that Unicycle Pizza Time, that's why we also gave it that psychological horror tag, is also a tension game. It doesn't need to be purely, being scared of a big scary monster, but it could also be tension of, I don't want to fail this because I'm going to lose a lot of progress. That's also what I would say Celeste is like, for example, because you are focusing on that more, speedrunner approach. And then I think for Forge Industry, these are our first games where we didn't really think about things like emotions to design for. Probably Power, where you can see all of your massive buildings and your massive expanses of all of your automation and workloads and routes and all of that. See hundreds of little workers walk around on the map. I think that's a power fantasy as well. And the question now is, okay, what's your game idea and what's going to be the main emotion that you want someone to get from your game? And once you've determined that of like, I'm going to make a cozy game, you should keep this in mind with your future game design decisions as well. If you are making a cozy game, it doesn't really make sense to suddenly add like a very, very dark and scary part of your game where like you're actually shifting the main emotion from cozy into tension. Of course, once again, someone's going to be screaming, oh, but there are games that are doing this, but you're once again probably just a small team that does not have dedicated writers and all of that. Focus on one single emotion and it's going to be doing way better. I think going back to that previous example where we looked at Vampire Survivors and Phasmophobia and we kind of unpacked what they were made of, if we take a look at a game called Unpacking, where once again, super easy, simple mouse controls in cozy environments. This is a 100% cozy, vibes-based, emotion-based game, meant to invoke those feelings of moving into a new place, moving out of the old place. These are very, very powerful emotions for a human to have. If you've ever moved in your life, you know all of the melancholy and all of the maybe good thoughts that you have about it as well, because you're moving to a better location. And unpacking really strongly went into that cozy emotional vibe here. If you want to do a little exercise now, I think a good thing here is to figure out what would the first 5 minutes of gameplay feel like. Not describe me the features and whatever, but what does the user feel from the moment they start up the game? Because this is also things like your music. Is it going to be a more whimsical soundtrack, which is probably going to lean into the cozy vibe? Or is it like Unicycle Pizza Time that, you know, the more agonizing music, I would almost say? Those are immediately setting the bar for what the player is going to be expecting. And once again, here it goes to that mix. If you have a very tense opening soundtrack for your game, for example, and a very dark capsule, where, I don't know, there's like more gothic vibe, and then it's actually a cozy game. It's like, okay, immediately you're mixing and matching emotions. Describe, what does the game look like? What is it supposed to invoke for the player? Are they supposed to feel like they've achieved something already? What should that feeling be like if it's, for example, a power fantasy game? Well, you don't want to start them off as the weak, broken, and shattered boy, but instead you want to start them back at the height before the fall, for example, where you're just mowing through endless hordes and all of that. Immediately invoking a specific emotion. I think a good one here also is in Elden Ring, for example, that initial boss fight. Immediately, you know, it's technically unwinnable. I know some guy like can of course finish it blindfolded using only drumsticks as a controller, but for 99.5% of everyone who ever played Elden Ring, that first battle is unwinnable. And that immediately sets the emotional stage for the rest of the game. Mainly, you're fucked, bro. And this is kind of the vibes that you need to know in advance. What should my game instill in the player in terms of the feeling? And once again, this is part of your game idea. Because, you know, you can take that same game idea that you have and you can make it cozy. You can make a cozy pizza delivery simulator. Or you can make it a very tension-heavy pizza delivery simulator. And you're taking the same core mechanic, you're taking the same DNA, and you're even maybe taking the same tags, but then changing the emotions of the game, which once again make a very different game. Because this emotion, why do we talk about it? Once we know the core emotion for our game, basically, we can dive in a bit more into, okay, what is actually the features of our game going to be now that support that emotion, basically? Where in Papers, Please, the emotion was tension. And you get put with those moral dilemmas of, do I just become a cog in the machine and see all of the injustice that's happening? Or do I actually kind of rebel against it? And then based upon that, when you know that this is the core feeling of the game, what are the features and the things I can implement in the game to support and reinforce that idea of, for example, not being certain what side to pick? You add features like, for example, being able to correctly stamp a passport even if the people shouldn't be allowed to go in. Or you add features like being able to see the guards shoot people. You have those things like, for example, the money, where you add that struggle balance of, hey, I don't want my family and my kid to die, and I do want to earn money, but I don't know if that money should come to the expense of my moral choices and things like that. And you can build up a feature list, basically, where once again, like I said, always ask yourself, does this support the main emotion of my game idea? And now we have our main idea. Now we come more to the pitch. So, like I said, you should already have that first Steam store page description, those 300 characters. If that's something that you are already working on, I think that's good. What I like to do now is basically expand upon it once I feel like it's a decent idea and make a full mock Steam page for this. Now, hold. Don't buy a Steam credit yet and all of that. I'm just saying this with the knowledge I have now. Probably if I record this video a year ago, I would be like, okay, if you've reached this part of the process, your game idea is solid, put it up on Steam and get wishlists. That's unfortunately not the case here, because even if you're doing all these things right now, we are still in fantasy dreamland where you can do everything and code doesn't exist yet, and you can just be like, hey, this would be a cool idea and this is the end goal. I think a funny one, all of the game ideas that Thomas comes up with in our team, he's always like, I want this to have a feeling of, you know, anguish and despair and whatever. And it's like, yeah, cool story, bro. We've never been able to replicate that, but it's a good starting direction because it allows you to at least choose certain gameplay features based on that idea of, okay, we shouldn't add these specific mechanics or these specific elements because it's going to go against that fear or that anguish or whatever feeling that we want to have. Now, screenshots you can ignore for now because we haven't made a Unity project at this point, but I think what I do like to do at this point is, okay, we have that short description. Can we make a little bit of a long description as well? And the long description basically means expanding a little bit on the short description and having, I would say, 2 or 3 main features that you would have like those little headers for, a piece of text and one accompanying GIF. What would those be for your game? And see if you can think about it. And then you can also add like the little features tab at the bottom of like, hey, we have controller support, we have character customization, whatever, the stuff that's not really going to be core to your game, but it is still, you know, something that you want to mention on your store page. You can do this in a Word document or whatever, just to write it out again, because I think this is my favorite thing. Your brain thinks differently than when it writes something. This is why things like journaling and whatever on the side note also work so well, is because your brain is how I would describe a big ball of RAM, random access memory, and it goes really fast. You can very rapidly iterate on your thoughts and whatever, but writing those things to memory is actually kind of hard. And by writing these things down, you are forced to think about it more than just a fleeting quick thought. And I think it's an even better thing to write it down because you're not going to be taking up that much space in your RAM anymore. Okay, this analogy may sound weird, but tell me, have you ever had that feeling where you've been thinking about the same game idea for 2-3 weeks and you just can't think about anything else really? And you're like, okay, I've thought about this so much. This has to be a good game idea. Let's drop the current one and let's all in go on that. When only turns out that once you've started that new project and you've abandoned the old one, the game idea wasn't that good. Problem is you have never written down your game idea most likely at that point, where writing down these things like your short description, your long description or whatever in advance, even when there's no game yet, it forces you to put actual words behind it, to actually explain the game. And the moment you've written them down, they get flushed from your random access memory. That's something that I really enjoy when I have a game idea and I'm like 50-60% certain of like, probably I won't make this, but it's like kind of a good idea. I write it down and you'll notice instantly the game idea is gone from your head. The moment you've actually written it down, you also read it again. You're like, yeah, actually, this is a very dumb idea. This is a thing, of course, like maybe it's not a dumb idea. But this is going to be the point where, once again, you're going to have a big filter between what makes a good game idea, what makes a bad game idea. If you've reached the point that, okay, I can actually write a long description for this game and a short description, and both of those sound interesting, a final thing that I do like to do is kind of do this is something that, I mean, it depends on how artistically inclined you are. I like to do a quick mashup of what would a potential Steam capsule for this game look like. Simple stuff. You go to like the font websites or whatever, and you look up like medieval font, fantasy font, cozy font, whatever. You make a pretty font version of your like name of the game, basically 1 or 2 or 3 words or whatever. You put it in a Photoshop document that's like the size of a Steam capsule, and you look at like, okay, what would be my background, my foreground, whatever. What do you want to show on this? What is, once again, the vibe that you're selling? This should all tie together, because once again, if you're getting these conflicts here of having a cozy capsule but then having a very, you know, dark game, actually, it probably isn't going to work that well. But the benefit is, once you have all of these things, you basically have a pitch. This is the point where you can start pitching your game to other people. And I don't mean pitching here as in like publisher pitching, but be like, hey, I have this game idea. What do you think about it? Because if you do it earlier, you're not giving enough detail and information to the recipient, whoever you're talking about the game idea with, for them to give a good answer without sounding like a massive ass. That's, I think, a big thing, because all of these steps that we've talked about so far in this video, I don't know how long the recording time is. I don't know if I can see. I think it's like 30 minutes almost. Everything I talked about now, except maybe, yeah, I think almost everything I've talked about in this video, you can do actually in 30 to 60 minutes. It's not like this requires 4 days or whatever. You get these things out of the way first, and then you start going out and be like, hey, this is the game, this is the short description, or like the pitch I have for you, basically. Would this be a game you're interested in? If they have like a question, you can like basically go and look at what did I write in my long description again and tell it to them. And this is going to give you a way better idea of are people going to be interested in it. Don't make a Steam page yet. Don't make like a quick prototype to get screenshots and all of that yet. I don't think that is the move right now. Because at the end of the day, just putting up the Steam page itself, it's not going to give you any visibility. There's no point in showcasing the game until you have a trailer, until you have 30 seconds of gameplay and all of that. We're going to ignore that for now. We're purely focused on the ideation phase. So then we come to module 3, aligning with the market, where we're going to start by looking at Steam tags. Like I said, we now have that idea, and we added those tags like multiplayer or roguelite or whatever, but this was more for ourselves yet. We weren't doing market research yet. We were just thinking about what would be something that I'm interested in. You know, that Venn diagram of what can I make? We filtered that out at the beginning. What do I want to make? That's what we did in the previous module. And now we're going to be looking at that third circle. What is actually profitable? What is something that I can do and expect that the market will have an interest for? I'm not going to make a game that's in a dead genre, for example. If you reach that point where you can make your entire Steam page, you can also kind of make your tagging already, because you should be able to see what are some relevant similar-ish games, for example, and figure out what tags do they have in common. And there's a great website that I've made. I'll link it down below, steamtaghelper.com, where you can upload like 2 or 3 games, and it's going to give you the overlap of tags that they have, so you can see as well, okay, these are probably going to be some tags that my game will have as well. Now, this could be things like, for example, co-op, or this could be like roguelite or whatever, or depending on, once again, the idea you go for, it could be tags like, for example, Viking or biking or any other thing, basically. We'll dive into those in a second. So you come up with some of your core main tags. What would be like the 3 first tags that are going to be showcased on your store page? Is it going to be psychological horror? Is it going to be automation? Whatever. That's when you want to go to websites like, for example, Gamealytic, VG Insights, whatever, and see how do these tags perform in general. Now, there's a lot of caveats here. Dive into it in a second. Look at games released in the last 3 years, I would say. Because if you go and look at the 2D platformer tag and you look at the entire history of Steam, like 2008 until 2025, you're going to get very, very different results than if you look at from 2022 to 2025, for example. I generally do the last 3 years to get a decent idea of what state is the current market in. We're also then at the end of the COVID boom, basically, which is a good point. One important thing here, because I had a conversation about this recently, is that these tags are not going to be your be-all, end-all answer. There are still, correlation, causation issues where you'll notice that certain tags, like for example, biking, perform really well if you look at it from a monetary standpoint. But then if you actually look at like the median revenue, for example, it's way lower than the peak revenue and all of that, because maybe you have like some AAA games kind of eating up into the entire inventory and all of that. Not every tag is equal, especially with those more niche esoteric tags that kind of could fit on everything. Like Viking is, I think, another one where having a Viking game does not mean success, even though I think on Gamealytic Viking games are pretty successful. But you want to find those 2 to 3 tags that would fit with your game and have a decent amount of chance as well of having some market potential. Sites like Gamealytic, like I said, are very easy. Don't look at like the average revenue, I would say. Either look at median, or I think they also show like bottom 25 or 30% or something, which should give you a more conservative number of this is a potential I could earn with my game. And if that number is like too low for you, those bottom 30%, then okay, go back to the drawing board and see, do I want to change something? Do I want to take the L on this and just make the game in a relatively short dev cycle, maybe shorter than I originally planned, so you get closer to that recoup? Or do we just take it and go for it? So once we've decided those tags and kind of more of an idea of what's the Steam game we're going to make, how is my game going to fit onto Steam in general, then we get to the point where we look at our competitors. What is our actual competition now? Because remember how I said earlier of like, originality doesn't mean you have a marketable game. Now we're going to do, like I promised, the yoink and twist. How do we do this? Because generally, slightly new and different and overall improved is always going to outperform totally unique. Even a game like Stardew Valley, which is at like 97% positive rating or whatever, has flaws. Because if Stardew Valley was absolutely a perfect game, well, games like Fields of Mystria would never have performed as well. What Fields of Mystria did is, for a lot of gamers, Stardew Valley is considered a cozy game, but for cozy gamers, Stardew Valley actually has some pain points, like having a miserable fishing game and relatively middling, I know, remember this is in the farming sim specific, like middling dialogue and whatever. And Fields of Mystria took that feedback. And they looked at, okay, people like Stardew Valley, let's compete with Stardew Valley, which is honestly one of the most big ball statements to say. But they pulled it off because they focused on getting rid of the very annoying and frustrating fishing mechanic. And they focused way more on writing better dialogue than the original Stardew Valley had. And they found an audience because of this. Graphically, visually, maybe honestly, you hear this complained a lot, it's nowhere near as good as Stardew Valley. But it's improved upon different aspects that made it still a massively successful game. This game has sold millions of dollars at this point, even though on the surface it looks like another Stardew Valley clone. It clearly performed well still. There are some sites like, for example, Steam Sale as well that make it very easy. I'll link that one down below as well, to just go through like a whole bunch of reviews in one go and then see the main pain points that your game idea has. This brings us to, for example, the game idea for Kyoto Anomaly that we did, where on Kyoto Anomaly, we knew the gameplay loop because it's not a complex gameplay loop, but we did actually spend, I would say, like an entire day, even longer, looking at reviews, whether it's video reviews or it's the Steam reviews and all of that. And we read pretty much every single negative review there was to figure out why do people not like this game. For example, Shinkansen Zero, high price, low performance, not enough endings. Exit 8, not enough replayability. And we took a look at all of the other like anomaly likes that came out later as well, figure out what do they not like here. And we just made this into a master document where we looked at, okay, this is every single piece of complaints basically people had about this game. Which one of these can we solve and how do we solve them? Like, for example, I think one of my favorite ones is if you miss an anomaly, it gives a little text up top of like, hey, here's a subtle hint what you missed, instead of just doing a blind reset, which very much was a big annoyance to players. And this is once again going to make it 10 times easier to sell your game, because there clearly was an audience for games like Stardew Valley or Exit 8 or whatever. You've now just made a better thing of the thing they already made. Game development, it's not exactly like, okay, I've already eaten this kind of cake, whether it's a banana cake or an apple cake, so now I don't want to eat my banana cake, which features chocolate as well, because I've already had the regular banana cake. That's not the case. It's more like, hey, there's more cake for me to eat. Let's give this another go. And that's kind of what it came on to. Of course, if you give someone a great cake and then the second cake you serve them is lower in quality than the original one they had, maybe they're going to be like, this wasn't really worth it. This wasn't really nice. That's the one problem. If you're going to yoink and twist another game, your game has to be better. Or it has to be different enough that it's kind of not comparable anymore, because you focus so much more on an aspect that the original game didn't. If you have a game idea that, once again, like Evermarch, is too generic and doesn't really stand out enough, you have to go back to the drawing board. I think this is where I can explain the story of Evermarch a bit more, where, okay, we spent a month of development time, Thomas did, on making the core RTS for that game. Basically, you could build buildings, you had troops, you could harvest resources and all of that. You had the fog of war, you had combat, but there was nothing special. And that's what I said to Thomas, well, like, look, Thomas, what you've made is functionally great. It works, no problem. But what's special about it? We're making a generic RTS and we're working in a genre that people have been developing games in for the past 20, 25 years that we can't possibly compete with. We cannot make another Age of Mythology or another Age of Empires because we just know we can't reach that level of quality required. So that's when we realized, okay, we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to go back and figure out what is something where we can keep that core RTS mechanic, but make it different. And we actually started brainstorming, and the idea we ended up with is, I think, a game idea that's way, way better, where we went from, okay, I gave you the pitch earlier of like generic RTS where you teleport your base, but it was like, it didn't explain the gameplay mechanic instead. And I'm like, okay, what if we 180 degrees flip this? Instead of generic RTS, fantasy medieval style, What if you're a recently resurrected necromancer who is living in the underworld and who wants to go and invade the overworld, where we can keep that base teleporting mechanic, because you're basically opening a portal in different biomes next to the little village or next to the desert or whatever, to go and harvest resources there, to go and conquer and claim souls and all of that. And you teleport back to the underworld and you expand the underworld and you do more and more, you know, little campaigns where you go and attack settlements in the overworld because you want to consume the entire earth. Gameplay wise, nothing really changed, honestly. Like, from the perspective of the code that was already written, Thomas had to change 0 things. But we suddenly went into something that was so different, or like different enough from all of the other RTSs, Nine Kings and all of that, that we now had something to stand out again. Now we had something that, you know, the mechanic made more sense lore-wise. We had less competition, because you have like games like Worshippers of Cthulhu, which would be then in that similar vein of having multiple dimensions but focused more on that colony sim. And Worshippers of Cthulhu did pretty decently, I would say, if you look at the last year when it released. And we just had to do a reskin, basically, where we go, instead of, you know, green environments and all of that, we go more into the hellish sphere. Instead of general humans, we have skeletons for everything, but everything else stayed the same. And I think this is a great example of looking at the competition, looking at, okay, we can't stand out on this part, how can we stand out instead? Can we stand out settings-wise? Can we stand out feature-wise, mechanic-wise, and all of that? For this game, once again, we're going into that power feeling as well, that power emotion, because you're going to run your entire Lich King army, basically, and you're going to take over the world, which I think is a pretty strong power fantasy. But I think this is a good example of just being like, hey, if we can't make it better, we have to be different. And in this case, when you're going into an established genre of games that have been out for 20, 30 years, being better is very hard. It's very hard to make a better 4X game. Instead, you have to make a different 4X game, basically. Whereas, if you think of Vampire Survivors or whatever, came out 2 years ago, like at this point a bit later, but you know, it's very easy to be better still, because there's only like 10 games that came out before it in that specific genre. I think you also saw this with all of the Bellatro likes, where you saw those very rapidly developed, quickly succeeding follow-up games that were different developers and whatever, but for the most part addressed like 1 or 2 problems, maybe did a little bit of a rebrand or a reskin, and that's about it. Even honestly, sometimes leaning into that Bellatro style, but just slightly changing, going from, instead of poker, going to blackjack and all of that, and not really having to worry too much about being different, just have a better general overall experience. I think this was kind of an in-between bonus point that I didn't originally plan on catch up on, but I think overall this is a very good thing where, okay, we have those 2 or 3 main competitors. I think that's the main number you should look at. Like, 1 is going to give you too many blind spots. If you go for like 5 competitors, you're going to be trying to do too much at one go. Look at 2 or 3 games that you would consider your closest competitors and obsess over them to figure out what's wrong with them and how can I be better than them. You read the reviews, you watch videos about people playing the game, you watch how they do. I wouldn't dive too deep in you having to play like 100 hours of your competitors' games before you can understand what the game's about. Like an hour is honestly fine. And from then on, basically just figure out, making a list of what are their biggest mistakes and how do I make sure I don't make those mistakes myself. And that brings us to module 4. We have the 3 circles of our Venn diagram. We have an idea that is relatively wargamed at this point of, okay, we've ran the simulations. This maybe sounds a bit weird, but we have a game that we know we can stand out. We know it's got a market for it. We know we can make it and all of that. We know we're confident in the fact that we can make it, and we're clear in explaining what the game is. This, once again, should only take a few days, tops. Now, the make or break moment comes. Figuring out, can we actually make this game? Can we prototype this game? And especially, is the game fun? Is the idea I have actually as good as I think it is? This is where, you know, the video is not sponsored, but this is where I think vibe prototyping is really solid, because you can now, in a span of 1 to 5 days, I think 5 is already pretty long, like basically in less than a week, easily, you can prototype this game idea and figure out, does it work, yes or no. I've prototyped game ideas in, I would say, 2 to 3 hours, just using like ChatGPT to ask for the main controller, to ask for certain things. You can use Bezi for all I care. You just want to figure out, okay, does this look as good as I imagined it? And the big important thing here is you need to use assets. You use some assets to figure out, does this game sell? I am personally very much against using like gray box prototyping, because this is a school of thought you hear a lot of like, okay, when I make that first prototype of my game, it's all gray box because I just want to know if the game is fun even when it's ugly. I think that's a bad take, because once again, going back to, you know, keeping in mind marketability, vibes, emotions for this game. If you're doing gray boxing, you're not getting any emotions for the game, basically. You're only casting a single gameplay feature in isolation, which I don't think you should do. I think in your prototype, immediately from the first like few lines of code you write, you add a simple music controller or whatever, so you can play a song whilst playing the game. Because once again, the song is probably like the opening credits is going to be one of the first emotions that your player is going to have with the game. Are they going to feel powerful? Are they going to feel, you know, dark? Are they going to feel something else? Very important from the beginning. And then you focus on the art style that the game is going to have as well. It's super important. All of these things are very cohesive to each other. You need an art style, you need sound, and you need actual gameplay. And the gameplay takes the longest time because, you know, if you have the asset pack, if you have the music, you're already halfway there. You just need the other half. I think a great example for this was the prototype we made for Overtime Anomaly, where we just used the demo scene for the game. We slapped in a first-person controller. There were no monsters or whatever, but we could immediately feel how is the tension for this game in like 2 hours or something. Very easy, very fast. Great there. And then we focused on, okay, going back to that core DNA, remember from, I think, 20, 30 minutes ago, what is the single main mechanic of this game? Is it moving around and then, you know, the auto-attacking? Is it the point-and-click aspect? Is it that first-person controller? And do a little bit of expansions upon this. For Overtime Anomaly, we had a very simple task here where we just had to refill a fax machine. And that's it. We just tried that out. Worked really well. And that's when I realized, okay, there is some more potential in this game. Another game, My Virtual Friend, was vibe prototyped in like 2 days as well to see, okay, I have this idea. Is it actually interesting? And let's make all of this. Now, there are definitely some red flags here as well. If you're making a multiplayer game, immediately it's going to be harder. Like at this point, we, ByteMe, can prototype a multiplayer game relatively fast because we've done it a bunch of times, but especially in the beginning, if you're just trying to figure out an idea, see if it works in single player first. If it doesn't work in single player, well, wait with multiplayer. I think overall, most games should be single player first focused anyway. If a game is multiplayer only, it's dead in the water. It starts with that. You always need to have a good single player version anyways, so just drop the multiplayer for the prototype. Just make it single player. I just can't believe that your game is going to be literally unplayable without multiplayer. Because I think then you need to ask yourselves, is this really the game that we should make? Because you're killing so much of your market basically by being a multiplayer only game. Some other red flags is like, okay, don't want to use custom engines to begin with. Use something like Unity or Godot for all I care. Something that you can just throw some code into ChatGPT or whatever and very quickly iterate. Because right now we're just figuring out, does the idea work? Is all this wargaming that I've done in my head, is it actually something that could work when I try to play the game? And this is very easy. What's the core gameplay loop for this? Is it just select building from menu bar, place down a bunch of buildings and make pretty city? Is it be able to slay monsters, to slay this, to whatever? I think if you want to see some examples of this rapid prototyping in action, the sponsored streams I did with Bezzy are great examples where I can go from an idea to getting a prototype that's good enough to decide, okay, we're going to spend more time on this, yes or no, in 3 hours. I had, for example, the idea for a streamer bait style Portal game, which was like 2D side view. And I realized after those 2 hours that, okay, this probably actually is too difficult for me to develop. But once again, we are down a few days, less than a week total from now, between coming up with the core original idea and reaching the prototype stage. And you don't immediately have to scrap the entire idea. You just have to go back to the drawing board if the prototype doesn't work out. Or I think another example that I really enjoyed was the Dungeon Inc. prototype, which was like an incremental dungeon game where you just clicked buttons basically and you had more little adventures going into the dungeon and you could expand the dungeon. And I think this was one where those vibes were really solid, really good gameplay and all of that in just the first few hours of development on that, where, hey, let's give this another shot. Let's give this a few more hours of development and see if this prototype is actually worth it, yes or no. So the task now is to decide for yourself what's the scope of my prototype. What is going to be the minimum viable gameplay loop that I need to implement in this game to see if it's fun. I also prototyped like a 3D geometric survivor, like for example, a minimalist survivor, like was what I called it, I think, where, once again, all we needed was that WASD movement, we needed an auto-attacking system, and we needed enemies. And honestly, once we had that and like a little enemy spawner, I could figure out, okay, this game feels pretty okay, but there are some issues in regards to, you know, the visuals and the genre and whatever, so we didn't end up making that game. Ask yourself now, what is the bare minimum thing that I need to implement to see if this game has any legs and deserves more development time? And can I do that in one day? Can I wake up one day and be like, today I'm going to figure out if I'm going to kill my project or I'm going to keep working on it and keep thinking about it and see if you can prototype it in that one single day. I have a little 4.2 module here as well that are my scoping tricks. So I mentioned some of these. Always use asset packs. We use like Synthi. We have like the Synthi pause, which gives you like every single Synthi asset pack that there is basically, which is really nice for us to rapidly validate ideas. There's also Kenny assets, for example. It doesn't need to be the final thing. There's a lot of free assets also on itch.io and whatever. PSX style horror assets. You just want to very quickly figure out something more visual about the game. Even if it's not the final look, you still want to get a look that more closely represents the game. Even when you're giving playtesters and whatever, this also helps them understand the emotion. Also, another big thing here is just faking stuff. You don't need a big dialogue system or whatever. Just hard code it all. You don't need to add localization in your first prototype. Just hard code it all. Don't worry about like having branching trees and whatever. Just have one option if you have a very dialogue heavy game. Just have hard-coded upgrades or whatever instead of creating this entire like modular upgrade system from the beginning. Your goal is just to go fast and go as dirty as you can, just to make it fun quickly. I think another big trick here is just do feel as early as you can. Game feel is a cheat code. It's like the 80-20 rule. Just 20% of like small stuff of development will do 80% of your game feel. It probably doesn't even matter how, you know, maybe there's some glitches in the combat and whatever. If there's big explosions and particle effects and whatever, when you do that glitchy effect, people are going to forget about it. It's going to be way more fun because you already have the game feel than just, okay, it's a dead silent hit and swing, for example, with my big ass sword, but there's no impact, there's no nothing. It's going to feel way worse than having something that, okay, I slash the air next to the enemy or the enemy like doesn't fall correctly, but at least it feels very impactful. Also, if something takes too long, just drop it and move on to something next. You know, this is kind of, how did you take tests back in university or high school? I think is a big one. When you're stuck on a project or like on a problem in your test, so you get like a 2-hour window to do like whatever test it is, and it's like 30 questions. If you're on like question 6 and you don't know the answer to it, you're probably not going to spend the next 1 hour on that single question, right? No, you're going to skip it. You're going to go back. You're going to do the rest of the questions that probably you do know the answer to. And then once you have time left, maybe it takes you 1 hour and 20 minutes to do all the other questions on the test. Okay, we have 40 minutes left now. Let's go back to that beginning one and see, can we figure this out now? Maybe you've learned a little bit more. You've refreshed your memory from some of the other questions. Game development is like this. Instead of staring yourself blindly on one mechanic, especially in that prototype state, hop between stuff. It's not going to be pretty anyway. It's not the point to be pretty anyway in terms of code. I mean code here, not in terms of visuals in general. But don't worry too much about it. Like I have sometimes in my prototypes, I spend like too much time on, oh, I want to have like this button opens a pause menu, or I want to add like a little bit of button feel here. But then like, you know, ChatGPT kind of fucks up, but I'm like, this is not what I wanted. I just need to be like, 10 minutes after, being stuck, I'm like, okay, this is not going to be it. Move on to the next thing. And you need to be kind of ruthless in this. You're going to get better at this as you prototype more as well. But I think this is one of my pro tips for you as well. Just go immediately to that next step if you find yourself stuck on something, because the main goal here is finish this prototype fast. Finish it in 1 or 2 days, because you're going to probably have to go through a lot of ideas, not just one idea. So if you spend like 4 weeks on every single idea, well, you're probably not going to work too long on the idea. I think a final thing here as well, why you want this idea to be as fast into implementation as possible, is if you are prototyping, but the prototype takes 4 weeks or whatever, you're going to get attached to the game. And even if the prototype isn't fun, you're going to be like, I can fix her. Instead of being like, okay, actually, yeah, this game isn't as good as I thought. I haven't spent too much time on it. Chuck it in the bin and move on to the next thing. And then we get to module 5, testing and validation. So this is relatively simple. First thing, of course, if you have a prototype, throw it on itch.io. Easiest thing you can do. You make an itch.io page, should be very easy as well. Once again, because you already had that Steam page basically that you wrote in a previous game idea, maybe you have to tweak it a little bit based on what you wanted originally versus what you ended up doing in the prototype, because turns out you're not an all-knowing programmer who can make everything like that you think about immediately into code. Maybe you have to make like some consolidations. That's fine. That's normal, honestly. You want to update that. And I think just give it a go and see how it looks. We did that for my virtual friend. It got like a few hundred downloads and we didn't get an awful lot of feedback, I would say, but we got enough positive feedback once again to help validate that idea. This is important of like, hey, do people actually like this? Am I the only person who likes it? Are there other people who will find this game themselves? We didn't have a Steam page back for my virtual friend back then either. We just wanted to see, do people care about it? And this is where, for example, our Discord channel also comes in, the Improve My Game thing, where you can ask people, hey, what do you think of this build? You can submit them to me, although I know I haven't done that many live streams recently. I live stream, playing your guys' prototypes and whatever. And I think those are good points to get some external feedback about your game, because there's a very big difference between describing your game idea versus showing the game idea. It's like that meme of like, the guy thinking of a house that's like really pretty and all of that. And then the reality is it's just like a gray box because that's all they could make. You want to see this for yourself as well. And here you just look at vibes. You look at the stats and whatever. One thing that I would also prompt you to do here, if you have that core gameplay loop, is you can make a small trailer. And this trailer should honestly look relatively decent already because you used assets for the visuals. Very important. This is why you don't do the pure gray box prototypes and things like that as well. You immediately use the assets so you can realize, how does this game look? Does it look good? And you upload a 30-second trailer on YouTube or whatever. You can even do some marketing where you do like the TikTok format of, I don't have my phone here. Okay, so what you do, I have my laptop here, right? You make a TikTok where you take your phone and you run the game on your laptop, whatever, or a video of the game or whatever, and you record like this. So it looks very scuffed because you're recording a 16:9 laptop screen on a 9:16 phone, but you can like see the keyboard and it looks very shitty and shaky and whatever. And you put the caption on there of like, I'm a game developer making my first game. What do you think, guys? This is a format that big publishers use because it works. It gets views, it gets engagement and all of that. And you want to figure out, does this work? Even though those publishers have like hundreds of thousands of dollars in like budget for some of the games that they do this strategy for. They on purpose make it look like that shitty indie style because this also gets more conversion. All you're looking for now is data points from yourself and data points from other people who are playing the game. You can put your games on Reddit and all of that. And here, once again, your hook is going to be the make or break. At this point, I've harped on the hook so much already, short description of that. If you can't explain the game like a Reddit title or in like a 10-second thing by this point, you don't understand the game you're making. I think at this point, you should be pretty confident in understanding, what am I making and why is it so special and why should you care? So I honestly have pretty big faith in you that you're able to do this. If not, this would indicate that there is still a pretty significant problem with the game idea, but I don't honestly think that if you've gotten this far where you have something you can share on Reddit and it looks good and it has the vibes and everything down, you're still going to run into issues. And, this is where you give it a week. You give it a week where I would say ideally don't spend time on it. Because if your game idea can survive a few days of not 100% being focused on it, then you're doing something good. Like I explained this before, if every game that you start working on has a momentum bar or like an energy bar that slowly drops down as you develop. And when you start, it's maxed out, but the max out value depends on the game idea. Maybe you have a game and it looks like 100%, but it's like this high only. Whereas you have another game idea and when you start at 100%, it's like up here. And you don't see that basically, but every day you don't work on that game idea, it's going to drop down. It's going to keep dropping down. And if it's a game idea that started here and it's going to lose like 20 motivation points per day, but you only had 50, well, on the third day, you're going to be over the game already. You're like, actually, yeah, I've thought about it. It's not a good game. Whereas if your motivation bar was up here, it's like 150 motivation points. Well, you can lose a lot of time still of not working on it and still be excited about the game. If you combine this with then getting some positive reception, you're not looking for like people who mean like, yes, I'll buy this, but just people are like, hey, this looks pretty cool. It's going to fill up this bar a little bit again. And then if your bar is still high enough, it's not below 0 a week later or whatever, now you're in business. Now you found a game idea that you enjoy, that there's clearly interest for from the market and whatever, and it's relatively validated already. And this is the moment where you start bridging that gap between prototype and full-on production. And I don't know if this video is going to come out before the other one, but I'm planning a video as well on bridging that gap between prototype and going to production, because it's something that I struggled with for a while as well. But the moment you start with that pre-production stage again of like, we've validated the prototype, now let's work on the real game, the momentum bar is going to fill up again and you can keep going from there basically. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if it's not fun, if nobody likes it, if you don't like it, then yeah, it's time to kill it. And it's time to either go back to the drawing board. Maybe you don't have to go all the way back, but you can go back enough to like, okay, we keep that same DNA of our movement or whatever. But instead of taking the roguelite tag, we're going to go for, I don't know, rhythm shooter or something else. And we go again, give it another prototype. We think about it again. How would this game look? How instead of a roguelite, this was a rhythm shooter, and we try it again. Or you can just be like, hey, actually, I'm done with this idea. I'm going to leave it all behind and I'll go for something else. So yeah, that wraps up most of the main things. I think one problem now that you're going to have is, okay, what if I get more ideas? And this is always a tricky one. But like I said, I think it's important if you do get more ideas, and especially, you know, you kind of want to prevent yourself from overthinking about it. Remember the RAM analogy? You're working on whatever cool game you're working on right now, and you get a new idea in your brain of like, oh, this could also be really cool. Immediately, if you want it to die, you just write it out immediately and forget about it. You put it in a folder or something and you're going to forget about it. Trust me, as long as you do not write your game idea down to a certain degree, you're going to keep thinking about it. And you're going to keep thinking about the woman in the red dress, basically, but then it's a game. If you write it down, you're going to forget about it. Trust me on this one. And especially if you kind of, you know, on purpose, just write it down without thinking about it too much, because your brain is going to be satisfied of, you know, you wrote down the original idea. I have like so many ideas, honestly, in like my notepad and all of that. That's back then I thought like, oh, this is the next new thing. This is the best thing since baked bread or whatever. And then I look at it now, it's like, yeah, actually, I really don't care about it. This was a dumb idea. Like, for example, there was like a point in time where for like 3 days, I was thinking about a 0G slingshotting game where you were like at the ISS and it was like a streamer bait game. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so great. But the moment I actually wrote down the idea, I immediately didn't care about it anymore. Immediately. And I could just go back to the games that I was working on before. So try this out if you get more ideas as well. Just write it down, but don't give it more attention than basically. Just write it down, your brain's gonna forget about it, and you can keep working on your main game. So just as a quick wrap up, what are the main things we talked about? Okay, you come up with whatever game idea you have, you figure out, is this too vague? Is this not too vague? Is this something that I can actually make? And is this something that there may be an audience for? Okay, you can think about those 3 things high level. Okay, let's start thinking about what is the short description for my game? How would I explain my game in 300 characters or less? If you can do this, okay, great. We have this core base idea. What is the main emotion my game is going to incite? Is it going to be the feeling of power? Is it going to be cozy? Is it going to be tension? Or is it going to be wonder? Which one of the 4 is it going to be? And then based upon that, how do I want my game to feel? You write out the game feel of like, I'm making a cozy game. This is what the player will experience in the first 5 minutes, or what they should experience. Once you figure out the emotion, you can think about what would be the main mechanics that would support that emotion and support that feeling whilst I'm playing the game. Got that done? Okay, we're gonna make a little mock Steam page. So instead of just a short description, you can update this as well, but now you know the emotion. See if you can make a little trial capsule, for example, and make a little long description as well for the game that lists like the 3 core main features where you could potentially later on make a GIF and all of that. Once you've gotten that down, let's look at some competition. What is your game? What are your closest competitors? You should have games that are similar to your game, because otherwise you're making something way too unique and nobody's going to understand what you're actually making. And you go and you focus on, okay, how am I going to be better than them? What am I going to do in terms of maybe addressing the bugs that they have in their game, or addressing balancing issues, or addressing quality of life issues, or maybe there was a mechanic missing that people really wished the developers would have added, but they just never did. and you're going to put that in your list as well. Once you have all of those things, it's time to prototype. Spend 1 to 3, maybe 5 days at most on it, but go for it as fast as possible. If you're doing 5 days, it would be like, you know, you have 1 or 2 hours every evening to work on the prototype. It's not like 5 days of full-time development on it, because I think that's too long and you're going to be overly attached to your prototype, which is going to make it harder to kill it. Once you have that prototype, put it on Itch, put it on Reddit, you put it in our Discord, whatever, to get the validation, just to see, is this a game that people are interested in? You see if it can survive like a few days of waiting, of not actively working on it. If so, congratulations, you have an idea that you're probably going to enjoy working on for a while and that has some audience validation. Of course, later on in development, there may still be roadblocks, there may still be issues. This doesn't give you a 100% hit rate on every idea, but I would be pretty confident if this is the approach that you follow with your game idea, that you're going to have a pretty good end result. At the end of the day, games are risky. It's no other way about it, but I think it's still a very much manageable risk if you just think about it enough. And that's the big thing, you know, if you were to take this more analytical approach to game ideas, I think you can radically reduce the amount of risk, but then, you know, there's like a video that I want to make at some point of like the polarizing sides of game dev, where either you make a game with 0 market validation and you do it because you want to make a game for the love of the game and the hobby and whatever, or it's like, oh, you can only make the most optimized playway slop style games with just rapid development cycles, rake in the cash, and that's it. And it's like, you know, guys, there's like 15,000 middle points in between that. And I think this is kind of, you know, in that sweet spot of, okay, you're not going to spending months or years on a project no one's going to care about, but you're still going to be able to make a game that you personally want to make as well and get some sort of financial incentive or financial reward for making that game a good final experience for the player. And that's basically all I really had to say. Guys, this was a different style of video for this content. I know normally this is a Patreon channel upload, but I just thought this video was so good. Plus, I've also been kind of working on our own games a bit too much. I was like, you know what? I'm going to repackage this one. I'm going to put it over on YouTube because I think the amount of value delivered in this video, in my opinion at least, is really solid. If you like this kind of like full guide videos, which is how I call it, be sure to head down below and subscribe, because I have another one of these planned that probably will come out in about 2 or 3 weeks. That's my promise, 2 or 3 weeks from now. Just let me know what you think of this format. This like very low editing and just like going very deep into a certain topic. Like I think my end goal would be able to make this like one every 1 or 2 months or something. I don't know what else you would like to perhaps get full guides on, you know, things that we can fit into like a 1 or 2 hour format that is maybe like that in-between spot of a regular YouTube video, but then also not like a full paid course. So thank you very much for having watched this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!